Borderline Disorder: Symptoms, Deceptions, and Treatment by John Kirshen. Narrated by Sarah Owens. Chapter 1: The Appeal of Borderline Personality. At times, when people learn that I have an interest in dealing with clients with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, they're confounded. Aren't these the fatal attraction people who drive you crazy? Specialists could occasionally proclaim, "Oh, I won't treat those clients," even though they are. They just haven't figured it out yet. When represented in the media with the borderline label, these characters show histrionic, devastating, egotistical behavior, bet high drama, or outrageous comedy. Derisive descriptions of someone using psychiatric lingo is now less often. He is absolutely schizo, or manic, or narcissistic, etc. Instead, I more regularly hear, "My first wife or husband was a borderline." It appears that most acrimonious separations apparently arise from a relationship with a borderline. Although it is true that some of these people can be unreasonably demanding, self-sabotaging, and very tough, they also represent a group of patients who can be rewarding to engage with and make great strides towards improvement. Unlike some clients, for example those with ADHD, who could respond instantly and exceptionally to health treatment, borderlines travel a longer roadway to healing, although most significantly enhance. Although it may be a strenuous journey, it can be an interesting privilege to accompany these individuals on their adventure, tons of whom have shown their strong resilience by enduring horrific past mistreatment and outright abuse. I have had the honor of working together with people who started with restricted resources and education to achieve high levels of success. Borderlines with more positive prognostic functions, like intelligence, attractiveness, creativity, self-control, and a supportive environment, possess the potential to accomplish more. And the ones with less lucky endowments can still rise to a more rewarding life. When these people pursue change and help from good friends, family, and experts, they show great guts and strength in dealing with and learning to handle the unpleasant elements of their lives. Such people can be accepted not as defenseless waifs or demanding bitches or sadistic manipulators, but as strong individuals aiming admirably for a better life. Chapter 2: Society's Changing View of Borderline Personality. The concept of borderline personality disorder, or BPD, has evolved significantly since the designation was first defined over 70 years ago. In 1980, when BPD was formally specified in the DSM-3, most experts viewed it as a health diagnosis bestowed on difficult, constant, pain-in-the-ass clients. However, it stayed unknown to the general public. The original edition of our book, "I Hate You, Do Not Leave Me: Understanding the Borderline Personality," in 1989, was one of the first referenced books directed to a basic readership as well as to experts. Beginning in the 1990s and into the 21st century, other books on BPD have been released. Several of these are memoirs written by non-professionals describing relatives, lovers, and themselves with borderline symptoms. During this time, greater public consciousness of BPD has emerged. Films, TV programs, and other fictional media recommendations to BPD often portray those afflicted as hugely crazy, often self-destructive, and at times dangerous. Imaginary characters with borderline quirks can be attractive, dramatic, and vibrant enough to stimulate a story, but they're often portrayed as the bad guy of the piece. BPD is lumped with schizophrenia, bipolar illness, and drug abuse to clarify erratic behavior. Over the past 10 years, research studies have shown that in contrast to former presumptions, clients with BPD get better. They are no longer considered issue clients who never ever improve and whom medical professionals should try to keep from. Some treatment approaches have been developed specifically resolving borderline symptomatology. Clinical understanding, though, continues to surpass conceptualizations by the public. Media referrals continue to define BPD as a dark, hazardous label for crazy behavior. Ultimately, general comprehension of BPD will catch up with scientific knowledge. For several years in the past, imaginary characters who committed violent acts would usually be labeled schizophrenic, though few people with the analysis are ever violent. Sometime in the future, BPD will also be recalibrated in public awareness in a more reasonable way. Chapter 3. Can people with borderline personalities prosper in life? My comprehension of BPD has grown considerably from discussions with a doctor whom I describe as HO, who struggles with borderline personality disorder. Whereas my medical practice primarily includes clients from the middle and upper reaches of the financial spectrum, seeking assist with relationship problems, depression, and anxiety, HO has worked professionally dealing with young women from the lower rungs of the financial ladder who struggle with borderline problems. In her remarks right below, she draws our attention to the predicament of these patients. Our conversations, achieved through email exchanges, concentrate on the awful obstacles faced by women, and men too, with borderline disorders. My heart heads out to all who struggle with BPD, as the extreme feelings that rise within them can be terrifyingly unpleasant. I share here, with her approval, HO's newest observations. She has been writing to me about the effect of borderline personality disorder on the sufferer and also on family members. It is truly heartbreaking how much hurt and misery mental disorder creates each day, is it not? I have seen the illness of borderline character from both sides, both from the viewpoint of a sufferer, myself, and from the perspective of those that deal with and have been hurt by them, including my partner. I see how both sides are deeply hurt, those affected straight from living the hellish truths of experiencing BPD, and the non-BPDs who might feel horrified, abused, terrified, and who can even be criminally hurt by those with the disorder. Generally, individuals with borderline personality disorder are incredibly unhappy people. With their hyper-reactive amygdala and other inefficient brain aspects that cause super intense emotional reactivity, usually triggered at first by maltreatment from borderline personality disordered parents, women and men with BPD live lives identified by great obstacles. In their younger years, lots of them have suffered abuse. As they turn into adulthood, and especially if they're on the lower rungs of the economic ladder, they could experience little chance, great distress, sadness, loneliness, and a distressed teenage years. They begin in adulthood with damaged academic and career pursuits, plus desperate efforts at self-medication with drugs and alcohol. Their dysfunctional, hyper-reactive emotional reactivity might mess up even their most determined positive efforts to establish lives of wellness. Overly intense psychological reactions potentially can ultimately wreak damage of essentially every little thing they try to do. BPD patients definitely can become victims of their health problem. The women and men with substantial borderline personality disorders, and especially the ones who at the same time suffer from economic limitations, can experience such extreme emotions that they commit felonies. They can stalk, abuse, scare, steal, ruin property, set fire to, and even, extremely rarely, could hit or kill someone in a fit of rage. Financial battles make life more difficult, and lower-income folks have less access to reliable psychological treatment. At the exact same time, BPD victims of any income level are at risk for wreaking awful turmoil in their lives of others who surround them. Chaos, primarily of the psychological kind. Their fast eruptions of anger and speed even to rage, typically based on misinterpretations of situations, can lead them to deal with others improperly, including and particularly relatives. Anger induces a belief that what I want is holy and what you want is unimportant. That is, profound narcissism. This momentary narcissism, in turn, can cause people with BPD to become blind and deaf to the suffering they induce in close-by others. Huge personal strength, plus insight and persistence, may be needed to stop psychological outbursts from emerging. In sum, people who struggle with a borderline personality disorder could take advantage of others, and at the same time are themselves victims, tortured by their too intense psychological reactions. The difficulties they deal with are significant and real, yet hope is on the horizon. What can be finished with this dilemma? One particular way to make some progress might be to look at BPD as what it actually is, unquestionably shown by empirical research, a serious impairment. It can be an impairment that affects sufferers' quality of life, how far they will get in their profession, and their capability to sustain close relationships. The impairment can hinder their intimate relationships, preventing their attempts to find a partner, increasing the probability that if they do marry, the union will end up with a divorce. The psychological storms brought on by BPD's excessively reactive emotional system also increases the possibility that they will be challenged with regard to raising mentally healthy kids. With understanding of their disorder, and especially with efficient therapy help, these obstacles can be gotten rid of. Regrettably, though, therapists generally deal with only the top and greatest functioning of the iceberg of borderline personality patients. With costs of upwards of $100 plus per hour, psychotherapists typically work primarily with the experts and upper-level company folks who somehow, despite their brains having actually become wired problematically, have made it in life enough to be able to pay for treatment. In addition, BPD sufferers from higher income groups generally have enough education to purchase and learn from self-help books that teach how to handle the depression and anxiety, as well as the anger induced by BPD. Lower-income BPD sufferers could have less access to these self-help choices, significantly if they grew up with negative school experiences and a lack of confidence towards reading. In my work as a physician in a public health service, I have realized that the more lucky BPD victims, the people who receive extensive enough help to decrease the ravages of the disease, represent a tiny fraction of folks with a BPD diagnosis. The quiet bulk are hidden in the shadows of our society. Often in alarming economic straits from under- and unemployment, these patients either become profoundly lonely or endure repeated abusive relationships. A lot of people subsist on disability checks or end up homeless, institutionalized, or locked up. Destitution, institutionalization, or imprisonment can be regrettable outcomes for women with severe BPD. Men who have been diagnosed with antisocial disorder may, in fact, be showing the male version of what in women we call BPD. The normal outcome for these low-income personality disorder guys is also extremely miserable. With little to no treatment options, their roadway of life too often causes jail time. How sad that our civilization so improperly understands the nature of their issues, reacting with penalty when nurturing, teaching, and psychological help are so frantically needed. Less economically advantaged individuals with borderline personality disorders, through no fault of their own, the women and also the guys, have been dealt a really severe hand in life. Who will help them? Maybe they could have played better at the poor hand they have been dealt if someone had taught them to understand their psychological disability. That is what Marcia Linehan has been attempting to do. Her programs teach those with BPD first how to stop digging an even deeper hole for themselves if they want to get out of it. Strong mental health services could go a long way to giving these patients a chance to enjoy more rewarding lives. Meanwhile, on a brighter note, in spite of my own violent upbringing and my still tyrannical emotional turmoils, I'm succeeding. While I struggle, I do dominate. For example, I have found ways to practice my medical occupation in ways which allow me to decrease my interactions with clients. With work that needs me to face only just a few interpersonal circumstances, and for that reason, psychological needs, I have succeeded in becoming an extremely appreciated contributor in my field. In addition, I feel profoundly happy for my exceptionally comprehending husband. His active participation in raising our children helps in a major way. My grasp of circumstances that I really need to keep from, plus skills for handling situations that otherwise would have overwhelmed me, also have contributed to safeguarding our family from the devastations of my health problem. My kids are growing and developing incredibly robustly every day. As a couple, my wife and I are breaking the chain of generational transference of BPD that goes way back in my family. For my current good luck, in addition to my spouse, I profoundly thank both my own research studies of BPD and some of the mental health professionals who have helped me to learn how to manage my psychological handicap. Yet, who will help the many other women and guys with borderline personality disorders who have less resources to support them? I do motivate all with BPD tendencies to seek out help. Community psychological health, as well as private psychological health care options, do exist. Seek them out. Chapter 4: Therapist Personality and Borderline Personality. The relationship between a therapist and a borderline patient is crucial. Most importantly, the therapist must recognize and understand that his patient is dealing with BPD and the accompanying clusters of signs. A clinician must have the ability to endure complex paradoxes in the therapy comparable to the ones in which the borderline patient struggles. Just as the borderline tries to navigate between extreme psychological swings, such as happy to miserable and love to hate, the practitioner must balance flexibility and development with consistency and maintenance of boundaries. The therapist must adjust to the changing needs of the patient, yet also present dependable, consistent acceptance. Support and empathy must be stabilized with confrontation of genuine, practical realities. A therapist must possess enough confidence to hold up against potential obstacles of proficiency and caring, yet not be so big-headed as to thoughtlessly dismiss the patient's problems. Maintaining a good sense of humor may help retain a sense of proportion in dealing with crisis situations. The treater must be more vulnerable to her own responses to the patient. Countertransference. A current research study in the American Journal of Psychiatry from January 2014 checked out therapist responses to their borderline clients. Patients with BPD, more than any other character profile, aroused more powerful responses from clinicians. Feelings of vulnerability, inadequacy, guilt, anxiety, and poor organization were endorsed by these specialists. Some also experienced issues of being over-involved and making unique allowances that breached boundaries, while other people responded against such emotions of actual responsibility by holding on to more stiff limitations. The study also demonstrated that therapists' irregular reactions usually showed the variations in patient conduct. When the patient was mad, the clinician was more likely to either retreat from conflict for fear of infuriating the patient even more, or end up being more aggressive with the analysis. More beneficial emotions were experienced toward borderlines who worked at a higher level. The optimum patient-therapist fit happens when both parties work toward the exact same objectives and develop shared trust. Just as the borderline aims to attain comprehension of his psychological variations, the therapist also must recognize the responses that she experiences. In this way, the optimal collaboration in treatment is established. Chapter 5. The Borderline Ages. In one research study, both groups of symptomatic patients displayed high levels of functioning, disability, and accompanying other medical diagnoses, such as depression or substance abuse. Younger grown-ups, aged 25 or younger, tended to be more impulsive, self-injuring, substance abusing, and more emotionally labile. Older adults, 45 and older, reported greater social dysfunction, more lifetime hospitalizations, and emotions of persistent empty space. Borderlines who do recuperate over time report a much different experience. Academics investigating long-term development of borderline clients report that the ones who are considered totally recuperated are more likely to wed and have children. Those patients marry later in life and are less likely to get separated than those who stay symptomatic. Successful marriage and parenting are related to higher IQ, lack of childhood sexual abuse, no history of abuse of substances, and extroversion. These studies suggest that older and more youthful borderlines might present with different problems. We know that the majority of these clients improve considerably, but the ones who make commitments like marriage when more youthful and while acutely ill are less likely to sustain healthy relationships. Like many illnesses, enabling time to recover may be the best medicine. Chapter 6. Men and Women with Borderline Personality Disorder. The term borderline, used to specify borderline personality disorder, or BPD, has entered the mainstream these days, with television movie of the weeks sensationalizing borderlines and making them appear like unsafe, unique animals to gaze at, fear, and condemn. Television manufacturers really love a lot of the serious mental conditions because manufacturers are always aiming to fill the screen with as much dramatic action as possible. If you know at the very least a little bit about BPD, you know that some of its signs include severe behavior, which is usually deadly. The issue? Borderlines are real people with psychological injuries. We shouldn't turn them into inefficient caricatures. For years, I really believe we misunderstood BPD, especially with regard to sex differences in BPD. While the field historically really believed that women experience BPD as much as 3 times the frequency of men, current research by Grant and Associates in 2008 suggests that men and women show a similar occurrence for the disorder. 5.6% amongst guys, 6.2% among women. The researchers of the recent research study, though, also suggest that the expression of the disorder manifests in a different way in men and women. Anecdotally, in my work in inpatient psychiatric systems, I have realized that there are distinctions in the way borderline men and borderline women approach the world and those around them. More importantly, research validates the differences. For instance, Zlotnick and Associates in 2002 found gender distinctions with regard to the kind of impulsive conduct in which borderline males and females engage. They discovered that men presented more substance abuse, antisocial features, and periodic explosive disorder, while women presented more eating disorders. When it comes to self-harm conduct, I was taught in graduate school that women are cutters, another essentially negative, judgment-prone term, while borderline guys do not tend to cause physical damage to themselves. Yet, Omaya and coworkers in 2008 suggest that men and women actually participate in a similar rate of self-harm conduct, which includes cutting, bruising, head-banging, and biting. Given the probability that borderline men and women are comparable in some ways and different in others, the overall results beg the question: do borderline males and females differ in the severity of their borderline character? That's no easy question to answer, but Zlotnick discovered that both males and females presented for treatment with equal levels of psychological distress. When it comes to looking for psychological health treatment, both men and women seek out mental health services at high rates throughout their lifetime. Nonetheless, Goodman and coworkers found out that guys with BPD are more likely than women to seek out substance abuse rehab services, but not as very likely to look for pharmacotherapy and psychological therapy services. Finally, as we consider sex distinctions, I should resolve the fact that some readers could have some questions about what's happening to the BPD diagnosis given the new edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, or DSM-5. It is worth keeping in mind because the categorization for BPD practically changed. According to Stetka and Correll's A Guide to the DSM-5, 2013, in the field trials carried out in preparation for the new DSM revision, BPD was the only personality disorder that had good inter-rater reliability, meaning more than one therapist would examine the exact same individual and both concur that the symptoms are the same, and were also consistent with the criteria as detailed by the model for the BPD diagnosis in the last DSM. In the end, the exact same personality disorder models were kept for DSM-5 that were included in the DSM-4, though Area 3 of the new handbook includes discussion of a new hybrid model of identifying all the personality disorders. While the existing BPD classification could not be impacted much by gender distinctions, I do really believe that the next work group should seriously examine the frequency rates of BPD in men and women, in addition to specific ways in which the expression of the disorder might reveal itself in men and women. Chapter 7. The Borderline Chameleon. Changing Identities. Changing Medical Diagnoses. With the new year come pledges to modify your life. Resolutions are made to begin, stop, and change. Begin dieting, stop smoking, change jobs. For someone with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, change is less purposely determined. Transformation for such a person is more reflexive, less practiced. The borderline chameleon changes depending upon the environment and who is present, continuously having a hard time to fit in. A Republican among Republicans, a Democrat amongst Democrats, the borderline does not have a stable, consistent collection of beliefs and principles. This rising and falling identity makes it tough to establish a firm sense of self. Just as somebody with BPD struggles to stabilize a coherent, reputable identity, the clinician contends with developing a diagnosis which might be as evasive. The chameleon disguises of BPD implicate numerous illnesses. Could mood swings suggest significant depression or bipolar illness? Does devastating impulsivity presume attention deficit disorder or cover over substance abuse? A series of impaired relationships. Perhaps that suggests anxiety disorder or post-traumatic stress. What about feelings of paranoia or unreality? Is it schizophrenia? Am I borderline, or is it sometimes I just act insane? BPD is so tough to accurately identify just because it intersects with other disorders in several ways. Usually, it could exist together, but be submerged in the wake of a more prominent disorder like depression. Borderline signs may not become discernible until after treatment of the other disease is set in motion. Secondly, BPD's chameleon disguise may simulate another syndrome and induce an incorrect assessment. In such a way, a cursory assessment of mood swings might start a misapplied label of bipolar illness. Alternatively, BPD may camouflage another disease, be installed incorrectly as the primary analysis. Just as the borderline person is a chameleon, constantly modifying identity, so is the BPD analysis. Separating the syndrome from other conditions can be almost as challenging a job as the struggle to dominate the disease. Chapter 8. The Cost of Loving a Person with Borderline or Narcissistic Disorder. In my clinical experience, I have discovered that having a relationship with someone who has severe narcissistic or borderline personality disorder often causes one of the most distressing relationship experiences a person can have. Basically, the closer you are to a person with one of these personalities, the even worse the emotional injury. Whether it's a romantic relationship, a parent or caretaker and child, or friends, the experience can take a toll. First off, consider the following questions. Do men and women with extreme narcissism or borderline character plan to trigger such pain? Are they evil, or do they get off on playing mind games and hurting people? In one word, no. Females and males with these characteristics became this way gradually. Usually, it's the repercussion of an adult or other authority figure mistreating them and teaching them distorted lessons about what to anticipate from people and the world in general. In basic terms, one or more persons in a position of authority and close distance seriously tinkered these individuals' minds. I have found out that people with narcissistic and borderline character usually require years of treatment to resolve the distorted programming instilled years ago. Narcissism and borderline personality are different in critical ways. With narcissism, the individual feels remarkably consciously, meaning this is what they tell themselves. The experience of liking a narcissist is puzzling. Many people near to them see examples of how the narcissist actually must feel incredibly insecure, despite how remarkable and self-loving they act upon the surface area. With borderline personality, the individual fears desertion in close relationships and cycles through severe emotions as they go through everyday life. This experience, too, is confusing for loved ones who should think, "Wait, I'm right here and not going anywhere. How are you so sure I'm out the door?" It feels like the ones with borderline character are convinced you are leaving, as if they have information you don't. Those close to people with borderline personality often feel shocked or even scared by the emotional intensity that comes with their fear of desertion. Loved ones try to make sense of fear that simply does not make reasonable sense. While narcissism and borderline personality disorder are different, resemblances remain. With both, the individual always works hard and feels uncomfortable with vulnerability. Those characters require that a romantic partner serve the interests of the disordered individuals. Simply put, it is truly not about you the majority of the time. It has to do with them. If you challenge them or try to hold them accountable, they will snap and punish you. But mostly, the resemblance depends on the depth and expression of anger. Narcissistic and borderline people do not fight relatively or consistently. Those men or women get nasty in a way you could never have seen before, unless you know somebody else who is borderline or narcissistic. When borderline and narcissistic individuals fight, they can use words as bullets, meant to hit you where you are most susceptible. Being extremely close to a person who is narcissistic or borderline means that you will be dragged into more high-emotion scenes than you can count, with tears shed, allegations thrown, and a desperate sense of confusion overall. Making the experience more complicated, borderline and narcissistic people constantly shift their emotions and argument points, and in some way manage to suggest that the start of the battle or the general issue in the relationship is you. What an astonishing and complicated experience. Many relationships with somebody who is narcissistic or borderline do not last, for clear reasons. Those with borderline or narcissistic personalities can learn to have lasting relationships only if they end up being acutely knowledgeable about their triggers and are willing to discuss their insecurities freely with a partner on a continuous basis. And once relationships suffer such severe psychological damage, most won't survive the blows. Life with a person who is narcissistic or borderline, someone who has not gotten enough amount of help, is too aggravating for many people to handle. If it is a member of the family who is narcissistic or borderline, it's a lot harder to walk away. If you have ever loved somebody who had either character type, you know that the injury takes a long time to recover and that the sadness still comes back from time to time. Loving somebody who is narcissistic or borderline includes the buildup of a lot of unsettled anger and unhappiness, and these emotions are strong and lasting. With my clients, I have discovered that the saddest repercussion of loving someone with one of these personality types is that you come to question whether the narcissistic or borderline individual ever really loved you at all. After all, it deserves thinking about that someone inflicting so much pain on someone they apparently love may indicate that there never ever held true, consistent love in the first place. Ultimately, it's realizations like this that make the healing process from these relationships so intricate. It is fair to say that one is a victim of a serious borderline or narcissistic individual. I'm uncertain. On the one hand, I believe that it takes two to enact a relationship dynamic, no matter how dysfunctional it becomes. Meanwhile, narcissistic and borderline individuals do such a good job of seducing people that there could be a level of manipulation at work much of the time. Just how long does it require to heal from a relationship with one of these characters? It can take years, some or many, to truly recover the scars. For many loved ones, the experience leaves a trove of upsetting memories, impossible to shake in time. Chapter 9. The Borderline Dad. Dads with borderline personality disorder, or FBPDs, often vary from moms with borderline personality disorder, or MBPDs, in the attachment they have with their kids and the nature of the associated abuse. A primary difference between the two is that whereas MBPDs focus on their kids as primary attachment items with associated exaggerated dependence, FBPDs usually see their kids as secondary attachment items with less associated reliance. Borderline mother, exaggerated dependence on her children. Borderline father, overstated reliance on his partner. This is very important because if a borderline father is more likely to see his partner as a main and bothersome attachment object, the repercussion is that he might then experience his kids as hindering access to his main attachment thing and thus competitors for her love. FBPDs and babies. Gestation and childbirth interfere with his partner's ability to focus on the FBPD. Pregnancy and childbirth can distract the FBPD's partner in a number of ways. The FBPD typically becomes furious at the child and the mom of the kid just because the mom does not have interest, energy, and concentration on the FBPD that was there before the kids. This is a natural consequence of the demanding nature of early motherhood. Regretfully, as a consequence, this hinders the FBPD's attachment to the kid even before it is born and intensifies after giving birth. The FBPD experiences desertion associated with the withdrawal of the mother, connected with her taking care of the kid. They usually complain about sexual desertion, related to the typical momentary disturbance with sex related to pregnancy and childbirth. that becomes worse as the infant needs feeding and other care throughout the day and night, usually leaving the mom too tired to take care of the FBPD. Fathers without BPD often are comprehending and, in fact, find the mom's nurturance toward their offspring admirable and appealing. The FBPD finds this threatening and may become angered at the mother, the child, or both. In these scenarios, the FBPD may encourage or need that the partner overlook the child so that she may address his needs. FBPD. Let's go to our preferred dining establishment tonight for a great romantic dinner. Mother. What about the baby? FBPD. We can get a sitter. Mother. I feel that she's too young to be left with a sitter. She's still breastfeeding. FBPD. You can pump some milk. Mom. I just don't want someone else feeding her yet. FBPD. Perhaps having a kid wasn't such a good idea after all. In this dialogue, the FBPD is motivating the mom to violate her maternal impulse by deserting the kid briefly and then punishing her hesitation. He comes to see both the baby and the mom as obstacles to his access to his main attachment object, the mom. Acting out by the FBPD in the form of adultery is not unusual under these scenarios. The mother's attention to the kid is seen as abandonment, thus justifying his looking for love in other places. FBPDs and young children. As the child ages, the FBPD is more likely to bond to the child. The bond tends to be secondary, however, and focused mainly on the needs of the dad rather than those of the child. FBPD. How would you like to watch a football game with Daddy? Child. Don't you generally watch football with Uncle Tommy? FBPD. Yes, but Uncle Tommy can't make it today. Child. Okay. Later. FBPD. Where are you going? Kid. Daddy, this is boring. I don't want to watch anymore. FBPD. But the game is not over yet. Child. I want to play outside. FBPD. This is the last time I ask you to hang out with me. In this example, the secondary nature of the attachment to the child is instantly apparent as he asked to sit in for a preferred attachment object, Uncle Tommy. The child probably will leap at the chance anyway to have time with the father. In this situation, he fails and is then declined and made to feel bad about his efforts, and for this reason, himself. This typically triggers the child to be more solicitous the next time, while her or his confidence is reduced by being blamed for not pleasing the FBPD. This then justifies abuse in the form of desertion, devaluation, or perhaps even physical abuse. FBPDs and children. Hey, Father, I really need to validate you will be driving me to my game Saturday. FBPD. What time does it begin? Child. Same as weekly, 2 o'clock. FBPD. I might be several minutes late. Child. Dad, if I'm late, I can't begin. FBPD. You are putting pressure on me. Child. Father, you knew I had to be there at 2. FBPD. You unappreciative little piece of trash. You would not be in the league if it were not for me. In this example, the father has put some other chance ahead of being at his child's ball game. He is humiliated when the child faces him on this. His solution is to make himself the victim by making the kid feel badly about wanting his dad at the ball game. FBPDs and the adult child. While the FBPD regularly treats his relationship with his kids as a secondary bond, he, however, expects the kid will have a primary bond with him. It infers that if he expects that the kid will make him initially top priority when there's a dispute. This may end up being more obvious as the child enters adolescence or young adulthood. FBPD. I really need a ride to the medical professional tomorrow at 10. Can you choose me up? Child. Did you just make this appointment? FBPD. No, my friend was supposed to take me, but something came up. Child. Father, I have a big interview tomorrow morning, and I cannot reschedule it. FBPD. Can you just move it up several hours? Kid. No, Father, it will harm my opportunities. FBPD. After all that I provide for you, I do not think that I ask too much. Kid. I'm pretty happy to take you to the doctor's. I just really need advance notice. FBPD. I may not always have advanced notice. Child. But this time you did. FBPD. Oh, so I really need to make a visit to get ill. Kid. You are not sick. This is a routine visit. FBPD. Forget it. I'll ask your sister. Here, the FBPD was exercising his second option, just because his first choice, his good friend, fell through. He nevertheless expected the kid to drop everything and treat the father as a primary attachment. When the child does refrain from doing so, the FBPD ends up being violent. Like the female sufferers of borderline personality disorder, the FBPDs are intolerant of criticism and cannot take real responsibility for any error or defect. FBPD, the victim. Child. Father, when you finish emailing, I'd love to speak to you about something. FBPD. Proceed. I'm listening. Child. I will wait. I do not feel like you're listening when you're addressing emails. FBPD. Emails were okay when you needed cash for school, you thankless piece of garbage. Kid. I'm just trying to have a considerate conversation with you. FBPD. You are going to tell me how to be respectful? I wish I never had kids. Here, the FBPD responds to criticism with abuse. That is a characteristic pattern of both male and female victims. The kid is penalized for trying to work out a mutually respectful relationship with the parent. The FBPD is injured by any criticism from anybody. The pain activates instant rage, and the FBPD presumes the posture of victim. This invalidates any and all abuse to the kid, which is generally uttered instantly and without restraint. The kid's criminal offense of finding fault with the parent is enhanced to a felony. The FBPD treats the child like he or she has launched a vicious attack and responds with full ferocity. Paradoxically, regardless of the intensity of the instant vitriol that can be triggered by any perceived criticism or minor, these aggressive expressions are transitory. FBPD. Son, was there something you wanted to discuss with me? Child. That's okay. I looked after it. FBPD. I'm not on the phone anymore. Kid. Father, I already dealt with the problem. FBPD. Oh, so now you're going to punish me by not talking to me? Kid. Dad, it's not a punishment. I'm going to tell you if you really want to know. FBPD. Well, I actually do not. I have better things to do than talk to a loser like you. Here, the FBPD expects the kid to just overlook the abuse attachment just prior and share honestly with the parent. The kid is instantly in a problem that he is being asked to share openly with a parent or caretaker who has just recently brutalized him. He is then penalized for his natural response, hesitation, and then punished again for giving in too late. Women are 3 times more likely than guys to be identified with borderline personality disorder. This implies that there are a lot more FBPDs than MBPDs, but the men are no less upsetting. Their need to see themselves as foolproof compels them to assume the victim role when they feel criticized or slighted. They usually respond with a violent attack at the perceived wrongdoer. Making it through the borderline dad. Maturing with one or more parents or caregivers impacted with BPD causes considerable damage to the kid's sense of self. Relief can only be attained by stopping the abuse. This is done by setting up constant boundaries that don't enable this kind of abuse. Once this is achieved, healing of the self can occur by acknowledging the damage done by the abuse and recasting the relationship in more realistic terms. The nub of the issue is that if you have been raised by a borderline mom or dad, these behavioral scenes are your typical. First, you need to step outside the violent relationship sufficiently to realize what has been done to you. After all, children don't request for abuse from the people they really love the most in the world. After this, psychotherapy can assist with objectifying what is going on, setting good limits, and being the best daughter or son that you can choose to be under the situations. It's a fight that's worth the effort. Chapter 10. Borderline personality affects all races and both genders. Borderlines, we so need another term, have emotional instability, usually overreacting to the smallest of things. Interpersonally, they have abandonment and trust problems. They have an irregular self-image, unsuitable rage, chaotic relationships that mainly end badly, and some self-injure and/or are self-destructive, and that's just for starters. BPD can happen in typical families, though in today's world, what's typical may be a matter of dispute. But stats and scientific analyses indicate that many BPD cases develop in families with some degree of abnormality, dysfunction, or psychosocial structural challenges, whether real or simply perceived by the one afflicted. The National Institute of Mental Health, or NIMH, per the National Institute of Health, NIH, states on its site that the prevalence of BPD is 1.6% of the adult population, as they mention a 2007 study. According to many sources, BPD impacts approximately 1 to 6% of the population. I tend to lean toward at least 6%, perhaps even up to 10%. However, 6% relates to 14 million Americans. That isn't a little number. Specifically, according to the National Education Alliance of Borderline Personality Disorder, or NEA-BPD, BPD is more typical than schizophrenia and bipolar illness. BPD impacts up to 5.9% of adults. 20% of inpatients admitted to psychiatric healthcare facilities have BPD. 10% of outpatients have BPD. 10% of grown-ups with BPD commit suicide. 55 to 85% of adults with BPD self-injure their bodies, and inheritability of this illness is approximated to be up to 68%. Current stats also imply that BPD is more common in females, white females. This may solely be due to the fact that women are more likely to report for mental health services, while men may be more unwilling or resistant to do so. Consequently, readily available information is not always a true depiction of the disorder's occurrence and frequency, and we all need to remember that men and other races also suffer with borderline personality disorder. I periodically search many government sites for data, but about BPD, there is little to no information, certainly no current data, and no information regarding guys, women, nor comparative information for special populations of Blacks, Hispanics, and others. The only unique population bar graph pertains to 2002 data of prisoners with psychological health issues, reported in 2004. Compared to extensive present data provided on federal government sites for other conditions, like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and STDs, there's generally no bar chart, no conversations, no links that directly point to existing research and data about BPD. Per my request, scientists at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Being Provider, or HHS, are looking into what, if any, current information they may have regarding BPD. I was asked to submit a BPD short article for another. I'll later publish the link, and I'm also preparing a book proposal about the topic. As a physician, and as one who met an otherwise funny and terrific man who, alas, is positive for all 9 BPD requirements and refused to get help, I have a two-pronged perspective of and experience with the disorder. I also created a BPD color flowchart that many like and others may find of interest. Because of my experience with the previously undiagnosed BPD patient who has so much emotional pain, I ended up being an advocate for increasing awareness of BPD. I applaud the steadfast efforts of Dr. Perry Hoffman at the NEA BPD and my coworkers Dr. John Gunderson and Dr. Blaise Aguirre, plus their staff at McLean Hospital in Boston, plus many others. I also applaud the NFL's Brandon Marshall, who in July 2011 courageously shared with the world that he has BPD. Given deep space of present main country information, efforts must be made to more advance the general public discussion of BPD, particularly in the hollowed halls of our government's health agencies. This year, as time permits, I'll work to accentuate the absence of BPD data and discussions with HHS, the NIH, and the CDC. I motivate them to figure out the incidence of BPD in guys, and I also want there to be a concentrated, nationwide effort in high schools and colleges about BPD awareness. I encourage others to work within your own community. Get in touch with city and county health departments. Another place of opportunity is with health officials at colleges, and that includes HBCUs, simply because I am also concerned and convinced that Blacks may have a higher risk of BPD, given the oft-contributing aspects regarding family characteristics and the sometimes fractured family structure. If present, many are undiagnosed. I once spoke about this on the nationally syndicated Tom Joyner Morning Show, and the reaction was remarkable, as people acknowledged the signs in some relatives, but didn't have a name for what their loved one was doing. Obviously, I suggested evaluation. There is treatment to manage BPD, but a diagnosis must precede. I respectfully encourage our federal government companies to designate staff and funds to advance the research study of the occurrence and incidence of BPD in this country, because what data they have published online is old, and many crucial and needed measurable criteria that would prove to be valuable to increase consciousness of BPD are non-existent or not yet reported. Given the continuous public discussions of mental illness, do not let BPD be left further behind. This has been Borderline Disorder: Symptoms, Deceptions, and Treatment by John Kirshen, narrated by Sarah Owens. Borderline Disorder: Relationships, Drama, and Warnings by John Kirshen, narrated by Sarah Owens. Chapter 1. From Cute Little Girl to Borderline Personality Patient. One of the prominent commonalities usually found in folks identified with BPD, or borderline personality disorder, is their fear of abandonment. Could it be possible that women and men with BPD fear desertion because they do things that inspire people in their lives to want to get rid of them? Their upset behavior, for instance, is a losing formula for how to make a relationship last. I remain in no chance meaning to blame the victim. Many people with borderline disorders are victims of their psychological hyperreactivity, typically stemming from earlier in life injuries and a resultant hyperreactive amygdala. Meanwhile, the fears of an individual who fears desertion are totally appropriate because that individual's provocative habits invite rejection. I am also not saying that the conduct of those with borderline disorders is on purpose. I'm definitely claiming, though, that high-intensity negative feelings, and particularly high-intensity expressions of anger, can drive others away. Why would somebody want to desert an individual with BPD? Enabling a person who acts in painful ways to remain involved in your life might sign you up for too much psychological turbulence. The kind of BPD psychological overreactions I am referring to are the kind that bite off your head with anger. Bear in mind that all people with BPD don't rave in this way. Most suffer silently. Some, however, definitely do. I learned this lesson the hard way. Fortunately, the experience was brief. It ended nevertheless with my behaving in a turning-down way that at the time I could barely really believe was in my behavior repertoire. I was responding to the situation as a damaged parent and a protector of my children, not from my therapist perspective. Using the intonation my mother used to describe as talking in no uncertain terms, I sternly told little Jennifer Feather, "I will never enable you to cross the doorstep of my house again. You are never welcome to enter my home." Those words were severe, specifically for talking to a 6-year-old girl. Were they words of abandonment? Yes. Or worse, I didn't merely leave Jennifer Feather. I told her that I would never allow her in my home again. I ejected her from my life. That is by no means conduct that I would usually do. My office staff describe me as imperturbable. Many people usually like me, and I typically like them. How could I have ever spoken so meanly to poor young Jennifer Feather? The activating event. It began when I invited 6 cute little girls to join my soon-to-be 7-year-old daughter and our family for a birthday weekend in the mountains. We live in Colorado. My daughter and our family were relishing an enjoyable weekend with the children at a cabin in the woods. For 2.5 days, the girls had fun with each other wonderfully. All of the girls, that is, other than Jennifer Feather. Every time a group of girls included Jennifer Feather in their activity, fighting appeared. Whether they had fun with dolls, built forts out of branches, baked cookies in the cooking area, or played hide-and-go-look for among the trees, each cluster of 2 or 3 girls that included Jennifer Feather wound up with tears, anger, screaming, and at times even hitting. The repeated eruptions of psychological upset turned me into a fireman. By the end of the weekend, I was tired. The last fight, an argument Jennifer Feather started with numerous of the other girls about who would ride home in which automobile, finally turned my switch. I transformed from warm, practical host to a sternly rejecting, fed up, absolutely overwhelmed, protective of the other kids, mad mom bear. "I don't want you ever again to set foot in my home," I gushed out. "You are never, that is never, to come play with my daughter again." I repeated the words forcefully to be certain that Jennifer Feather understood. Despite the fact that she lived just a block or so down across the street from us, from this moment forward, I would never ever again want her to appear in my world. I had a lot of success with ejecting Jennifer Feather. I pretty much succeeded. I never ever saw Jennifer Feather again. Jennifer Feather did, though, continue in the exact same grade as my daughter, who for several years felt scared at the sight of her rude, quick-to-pick-a-fight friend. As it turned out, Jennifer Feather also ended up attending my daughter's exact same college. Thankfully, my daughter by then understood that Jennifer Feather was herself the victim of her habit of selecting fights. By that time, she and I understood that Jennifer Feather suffered sadly and badly. Jennifer Feather herself was the primary victim of her extreme psychological response patterns. Actually, my daughter's youthful experiences with Jennifer Feather might have served to help her as an adult to understand borderline patterns of functioning. Now a medical psychologist herself, my daughter has become especially reliable with clients who show borderline traits like Jennifer Feather's, patterns of emotional hyperreactivity, seeing circumstances and people as all good or all bad, having a divisive effect on groups, misinterpreting situations in ways that lead to feeling like a victim, and constantly putting themselves in circumstances that prove upsetting to themselves. This occurrence with Jennifer Feather, though it happened now over 30 years ago, continues to fascinate me. Particularly, how do some young people, male and female, develop character patterns that create chaos and fighting anywhere they go? 4 theories presently common in the psychological literature come to mind for me when I work with clients who show borderline patterns. One possibility is that the issue began with the parenting they got, parenting which had collapsed hierarchy. Collapsed hierarchy refers to parenting in a way that communicates to the child that the child has more power than the adults in the family. A second hypothesis is that their tendency to wreak havoc comes from biological sources. A third explanation could be that adult people with borderline personality disorder start to be specifically emotionally sensitive in response to an experience of trauma in their youthful years. A fourth clarification may lie in the paucity of mature habits for handling emotions and for collaborative resolution of conflicts. Let's look first at parenting problems. I do actually think that Jennifer Feather's mother may have been part of the problem. On the verge of a second divorce, she most likely was feeling highly stressed at the time. I have a hunch, too, that the mother designed anger as a method of requiring her spouse and kids to do what she wanted. In addition, Mom could have been too overwhelmed with her own problems to be able to take charge of Jennifer Feather. I had a hunch that Jennifer Feather used her anger to control everybody in the home, including her parents or caretakers, in a classic case of collapsed hierarchy. No grown-ups stopped Jennifer Feather's quarrelsome routines, so she continued to use them. I have a feeling that Jennifer Feather's father played a role also. The more he treated his daughter as his unique, can-do-no-wrong little girl, the more he weakened his partner's ability to tame her temper tantrums. Girls with a tendency to excessive anger need a strong parental system. Divide and dominate can be the daughter's highly efficient strategy for taking charge, and that's to everyone's hindrance, hers included. The second theory, positing natural predispositions, is especially capably set forth by Barbara Oakley in her book, Evil Genes. That is her title, not mine, as it can sound quite harsh. The book nevertheless makes intriguing observations. Written to come to terms with the life of her deceased borderline sister, the book seeks to understand the natural elements that can underlie this syndrome. Could natural factors explain a personality defined by quickness to take personal affront in circumstances that others would not, speed to anger escalations by which she controls others, and a propensity to unscrupulously control situations for personal advantage? While the book does tend to lump borderlines, sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissists in a fairly undifferentiated diagnostic heap, there is reason for this muddying of the diagnostic picture, given how much overlap these syndromes seem to have with one another. I myself am supportive to Oakley's natural theory, having had in my practice 2 families in which one daughter and a set of twin girls appeared from infancy to be borderline. The aggressive twin would badger the sister, consistently triggering her to sob and suffer pain. This pattern continued or intensified as the twins aged. The parents or caretakers gradually gave up, creating a collapsed hierarchy with the challenging twin judgment everybody in the family. I have dealt with comparable patterns in other families, with brothers or sisters rather than twins, in which the parents could never come to terms with a challenging child who was ultimately labeled borderline. Generally, one element of the inefficacy of the parents was that the difficult daughter showered love on the dad and hid her aggressiveness toward others in the family from him. Consequently, the dad never accepted the mother's evaluation that the problematic kid was disrupted and excessively troubling to others. With a divided parental unit, the difficult kid went on to conquer and rule the roost. The third theory, presuming prior trauma, also merits reliability. While my work as a psychologist focuses mainly on grown-ups and couples, I usually work collectively with an energy therapist, my coworker, Dale Peterson. In one session, Dale dealt with an attractive third-grade girl named Layla. Layla seemed to me quite borderline. She immediately brought to mind for me young Jennifer Feather. Like Jennifer Feather, Layla could be charmingly cute. At other times, according to her mother, Layla would end up being sullen, offensive, play the victim role, and then strike out, mainly verbally at her siblings and her good friends. Layla's mama, who accompanied her to treatment sessions, seemed to be warmly empathetic and appropriately reliable as a caretaker. She did report that from infancy, Layla was a needier than normal child, needing to be held much more of the time than her brothers or sisters had needed when they were children, and engaging more parental attention than the other children in the family. Still, the girl's regular anger outbursts were wearing down the patience of her parents and siblings. Using techniques from the treatment method created by Bradley Nelson, described the body code, Dale helped Layla and her mom to recognize an event that had occurred in Layla's nursery school when she was just 3 years old. Another kid in her class had entered the class when Layla was in the room alone. That kid, referred to as a bully, had horrified Layla. The minute they identified this occurrence, Layla's face clouded over. Unexpectedly, a cloudburst of tears appeared. As Layla later described it, I began to throw up out tears. When the sobbing episode had passed and the tears had dried, Layla described feeling a substantial sense of relief. From that point forward, the frequency of her combating with the other kids radically diminished. A lot more importantly, her self-esteem started to flourish, and she became a greatly happier and emotionally robust kid. Energy treatment methods, such as Bradley Nelson's emotion code, I do believe are especially necessary in treatment with borderline personality patterns. They seem to be able to reduce the effects of mental reversal, the propensity to be self-sabotaging. They can neutralize also the deeply held subconscious belief of, if it exists, that I am not lovable. Without reversing these two phenomena, treatment is unlikely to make enormous or lasting progress. The fourth hypothesis is that people who operate in the manner of a person with borderline personality disorder need to update their emotional self-regulation and conflict resolution abilities. The ones with borderline disorders explode in anger rather than calmly participating in problem-solving. Dealing with them is a lot like living in a field of landmines. Whatever the childhood experiences, to be effective in adulthood, these kids do need to learn skills for dealing with anger. They really need to learn to leave the circumstance rather than by taking off in a way that risks damaging others and themselves as well. Borderline functioning tends to involve a pattern of experiencing problems through the lens of victimhood. Once they feel hurt, up pops the mantra, I am a victim, so I have a right to victimize you. Lacking reliable relationship repair work tools, people with borderline practices make matters worse after upsets by aiming to get even instead of healing the wounds. Madly getting back at is just an incorrect idea of how to enjoy pleasing relationships. Similarly, when they want something and fear they might not get it, the ones with borderline personality patterns normally lack how-tos for creating win-win options, an ability that is vital for sustaining harmonious relationships. The hyperreactive feelings of a person with a borderline disorder posture extra obstacles. Collective problem-solving dialogue normally works out if both participants are operating from a calm zone. Whenever people feel mad, for this reason, they have to have the ability to stop briefly and even exit the problem circumstance to give themselves time to return to a calm emotion. At that point, however, abilities at win-win problem-solving can produce a happy ending. The ethical of the story? Primarily, fair or not, borderline behaviors can trigger people who want to get away from them. Second, with regard to the reason for the propensity to develop emotional turbulence, I believe that all four theories of how and why borderline personality disorders develop merit consideration. In any case, 1, 2, 3, or all of the aspects might end up being pertinent. Finally, These understandings can make it possible for people with borderline character syndromes to enjoy more gratifying lives and smoother relationships, if they want to. Way too much success at getting their way via anger, however, alas, can make it hard for the ones with borderline patterns to accept that what seems to work for them in gaining domination makes them losers in sustaining positive relationships. Chapter 2. Is borderline personality a female's illness? A cop pulls over a weaving, speeding automobile. The chauffeur, weeping uncontrollably, states a horrible split with a future husband, leading to overindulgence in alcohol and exclaiming desires to commit suicide. If the driver is a woman, the officer may wish to provide her a medical facility where she will be hospitalized with diagnoses of depression and maybe borderline personality disorder. If it is a guy, the police officer might be more likely to deliver him to prison, where he will be labeled an intoxicated. In treatment settings, borderline personality disorder is detected far more typically in women than in men, some research suggesting a ratio of 3 to 1 or more. But in general population studies, prevalence rates are similar. Several aspects may account for the variation. First off, women look for help more frequently than men. In women, spontaneous, destructive habits might more regularly be credited to illness, which can be dealt with. In men, comparable conduct could be seen as antisocial, where only reaction is police. Just as borderline personality disorder might be underdiagnosed in men, so also the male prevalence of the antisocial personality disorder diagnosis could reflect an underdiagnosis in women. A soon-to-be-published research study takes a look at these differences. Men with BPD diagnosis displayed more externalizing conduct, like interpersonal aggression, more violent self-harming patterns, and more antisocial traits, and that includes much heavier drug abuse. Women displayed more internalizing features. Those might include more overt psychological expressions, such as sobbing or sticking dependency. Since long-term diagnosis for BPD is better than for ASPD, it is important to recognize the distinction, to direct treatment efforts where they are most needed and helpful. Chapter 3. Black-White Interpersonal Relationships and Borderline Conduct. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, has become something of the taste of the week over the last few years. It's a useful label when properly applied, but has become so ubiquitous as to have lost some of its gravitas. In really understanding this disorder, it is essential to appreciate one of its most significant social attributes, the propensity for the borderline to split others, defining them as black or white, that is, entirely good or entirely bad, without room for a gray area. BPD is a psychological disorder that carries with it a hidden system of clinical depression and/or medical anxiety. It is itself not organic in origin. At times, it co-occurs with bipolar disorder and is also normally related to both addictive and compulsive conduct. The most dominant marker for BPD is psychological dysregulation, which is a failure to grasp or react to states of emotionality and/or react to the experience of those states of emotionality in others, in a manner that would be considered to fall within the bounds of conventional social propriety. Emotional dysregulation, then, is a failure on the part of an individual to recognize what would be considered the boundaries of typical reaction to what is sometimes an even decently mentally charged social interaction. There are, in service of this, two prominent styles of borderline development that occur on the entire continuum of borderline conduct: the aggressive and the demure borderline styles. The aggressive borderline character responds to tension, anxiety, and perceived rejection with rage, object-directed, self-directed, and other directed physical violence, as well as passive, although sometimes active, suicidality and homicidality. The demure borderline character retreats from a situation where they perceive themselves to be victimized or potentially victimized, and engages in a sort of social disassociation, a type of morbidly passive-aggressive reaction to social stress factors that feels and looks like a complete psychological shutdown and withdrawal. This is notified in part by an extreme essential on the part of the individual to avoid being accountable for any kind of surrounding situations, even when those circumstances and scenarios are self-created. All of us can be a bit borderliney sometimes, falling victim to a moment of psychological dysregulation, getting a little stalkerish, paranoid or hypervigilant, sowing the seeds of discontent or spreading out malicious chatter, pulling away into a state of passive avoidance or severe non-confrontation, etc. That is something of the incentive for what's a profound personality disorder, managing to lose some of its gravitas in common use. We can all get a little crazy at times. It's when these qualities are at the core of an individual's social style or position, a level of social disturbance so severe as to in fact be characterized as a character disorder, that things become more intriguing. We are first drawn into a borderline relationship by the charm and glamour of severe idealization about who we are and whom or what it is we represent that is shown to us. We are split white. This scenario feeds our ego and makes us feel safe, really wanted and loved. Guys are especially susceptible to the perils of this social idealization because of the sexual charge that these sorts of relationships tends to be intense, leaning decidedly more towards the kinky than to the sweet and romantic. Almost instantly, though, the inability of the borderline character to develop a genuine psychological connection triggers this idealized perception to tarnish as they feel they aren't getting their needs met, that they're unfinished, or they're dissatisfied, and so on. Depending upon the rapidity of the cycle, within weeks, months, or at times years, this idealized image is changed bit by bit with, for lack of a more medical term, its evil twin. The other is divided black, and once one is taken there, the perception on the part of the borderline character, while it may flip-flop for a time, is not likely to be reversed. One of the main psychosocial symptoms of the borderline style is the tendency to objectify others. Follow this. Psychological dysregulation, by definition, requires a failure in the inability to comprehend and or process emotionality. A failure in the ability to understand and or process feelings suggests a failure in the capability to develop emotional connection. An absence of emotional connection leads to treating others as things, not people. The borderline personality hence resides in a world populated by things instead of others, objects of love, objects of hate, items of mirth, items of rage, always items, always extremes, and never ever really linked, whether violent or demure in style. No matter the style of borderline behavior, nor the degree of emotional dysregulation presented, ultimately and undoubtedly, people and things within the borderline system become transformed from their original idealized white state into what may be described as the negativized black state. That is, they become the focal point of a negativeness so severe, a negativity is driven by a sense of disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, loss, and so on, whether real or more likely perceived, that the person or thing becomes characterized as wholly bad, at times even wicked, and deserving of some penalty or retribution. The effects of this split characterization on the part of the borderline personality can cause behavior that varies anywhere from basic stalking to social retaliation to murder. I had a friend in New York whose former mistress would stand in the doorway across the street from his business for hours, just smoking cigarettes. A colleague of mine once spent the night in a psych ward handcuffed to a bed because he would not address his previous sweetheart's phone call. A nurse, she had called 911 and convinced the dispatcher that he was suicidal. Another good friend of mine was totally ostracized by the members of his country club because his former fiancée fabricated ongoing tales of social and sexual deviance about him that she fed into the rumor mill. One of my clients once held a knife to his marriage partner's throat because he didn't have the t-shirt he wanted for an organization trip back from the dry cleaners. This list is unlimited. The true treachery here is that this sinister process of ideal to evil reversal gradually and inexorably assails the ego integrity of the person being divided, and that the person, while intellectually understanding that the other is acting out in an inappropriate and in some cases dangerous manner, begins to doubt their own peace of mind. This is because the person being split starts to mirror the qualities and habits of the borderline character she or he is experiencing in reaction to, and sometimes in an effort to manage, the behavior with which she or he is confronted, something that I refer to as counter-borderline character. A grasp of the numerous elements of this disorder can be valuable for us in handling and preserving our relationships, and also our less intimate interpersonal interactions with a person exhibiting borderline characteristics. This is by virtue of our awareness of the natural and degree of social and psychological deregulation that we could be challenging, and venturing to hold space for that, and understand what part of the relationship it is for which we are actually responsible. Chapter 4. The relationship between borderline and bipolar illness. Till specifying attributes were established almost 40 years ago in the DSM-3, borderline personality disorder, or BPD, was an unclear and uncertain concept. Because a primary characteristic is mood swings, some early scientists firmly insisted BPD was only a version of bipolar affective disorder, or BAD. After all, if there could be bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, why wasn't there a so-called borderline personality disorder, something along the line of bipolar 4, 5, or 6? Later studies developed that popular symptoms, such as abandonment fears and an unsteady sense of identity, clearly demarcated BPD from BAD. Genetic data also noted distinctions. A recent Norwegian study employed animal scanning to compare brain functioning in clients diagnosed with BPD, bipolar 2 disorder, and a control group. Scientists found similarities and distinctions in metabolism in these two groups. Both groups contrasted with controls, displayed reduced metabolic process in parts of the brain associated with emotional control and social interactions. BAD2 clients exhibited distinctly decreased metabolic process in the cerebellum, brainstem, and parts of the cortex associated in other studies with neurobiological depression. BPD clients revealed lower metabolism in other areas, including the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is intimately associated with the endocrine system, which includes stress responses and hormone secretions, including cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen. The hypothalamus is also key in the production of oxytocin, which relates to maternal emotions and warm social behavior. As we discover more about how the brain works, we should really appreciate that signs and diagnoses intermingle in different ways. Just as the symptom of a cough could ultimately cause isolation of specific bacteria, diagnosis, and treatment, so a psychiatric symptom may eventually lead us to separate a certain region of the brain that causes a treatment that can alleviate suffering. Chapter 5: How to Diagnose Borderline Personality Disorder. My concept is that even among highly educated psychological health providers, borderline personality disorder is a medical diagnosis that inspires a fear or avoidance reaction. I can think of no other clear reason why these patients so many times have not the slightest idea of what troubles them, in spite of years of therapy, often with several suppliers, as this is sometimes part of the scientific picture. Depressed patients know what their analysis is. Anxious clients know what their analysis is. Clients with psychotic disorders are normally notified about their condition. Substance reliance issues are discussed honestly, and relapses are typically charted. But borderline patients are often left in the dark. As a theme, individuals with borderline personality disorder have particular troubles with attachments to others, usually due to weak points in their early lives. People with BPD have severe trouble managing their own feelings, keeping healthy close relationships, and holding on to a strong sense of their own identities. This isn't the fault of these patients. Many borderline people I see are experiencing really limited insight into their condition. Most don't present like Angelina Jolie in the motion picture Girl Interrupted, inappropriate, manipulative people to be stayed away from at all expenses. Sometimes they're combat-trained men with huge muscles who are suffering. I figure that if we as providers are to have an actual chance to form a better attachment to these patients, it is critical to start by speaking truth in a considerate way. I have been fine-tuning my method to this conversation for some years, and I'm sure it's not perfect, but it has never led to any patient blasting me or instantly dropping out of treatment. No, quite the contrary. The response has been relief and the starter days of trust. Here's how I've been making this technique. First and foremost, I have on hand a non-judgmental explanation of the symptoms of BPD. Then, I ask the patient if he or she has ever heard of BPD. It is very important to learn what the patient knows and whether he or she comes in with potential unwarranted negative impressions of what BPD is. Then, I clarify that based upon their early attachment history, it might be likely that they are fighting with something that's correctable when we have the right analysis. Next, I discuss how Marcia Linehan, a high-functioning and very successful psychologist, developed an effective, well-researched treatment called dialectical behavior modification, or DBT, for borderline character as someone who struggled with issues that could be similar to theirs. Here, I'm going to describe readily available treatments for BPD. For example, at the VA, 3 of my associates launched an exceptional DPD group for veterans with BPD. I then clarify that DBT group program focuses on abilities connected to emotional control, distress tolerance, mindfulness, and social efficiency. Then I ask the patient If he or she can see why I may think this treatment could be on point, based upon themes in the story of their lifetime and what the DBT group targets. Here, it is practical to choose a line or two from their story, like, "When you told me that you get so overwhelmed when you feel abandoned that you burn your arms with cigarettes." In each case I've seen, the patient will say yes, because they will see that you are listening well, and they will see how a treatment program with these attention areas could be practical. Next, I tell them that I'm not sure if they would actually have the diagnosis or not, and wants to assess the criteria together with them to see if they think this fits. Then we go through a checklist of signs and talk together about each one. It is essential to make this evaluation without fear and to use a respectful tone. So you do not say, "Do you have a pattern of putting therapists on a pedestal, and after that, basically shooting them the first time they dissatisfy you?" Instead, you might say, "Do you tend to see others in your life in severe ways, either seeing people as awful or mean, perhaps even with other therapists you have seen in the past?" And in listening to patients, here's where therapists need to have clinical discernment. Some signs of BPD resemble what anyone at times would reveal through extremely increased times of tension. So, medical professionals need to assess whether there's a medically substantial pattern for each possible sign. As an analogy, when detecting manic signs for bipolar disorder, for a patient to say, "I went on a shopping spree and spent $500 on a cell phone," isn't the same thing as saying, "I have purchased vehicles I could not pay for several times in the past." At the time of this process, I provide helpful psychoeducation with the patient. If you do this respectfully, then at the end of this conversation, there will probably be no resistance at all to the diagnosis and referral. A patient will see what you are seeing and will essentially be confirming for you what ails him or her. For some patients, when I notice that they really need more time to process or really need to be much more empowered, I will say, "So, we have a sense of what this might specify, what you are fighting with. Why don't you take this printed information on BPD?" Provide them with a truth sheet that has a clear and respectful tone. Give it a few days of thought, and then take out 2 highlighter pens of 2 different colors. Highlight every little thing you think fits in one color, and in the other color, emphasize every one that is not a pretty good fit for your experience. We will discuss this later. Using a method like this starts a medical relationship that's based on truth-telling, and that is a kind of respect. To recap then, though I am by no means an expert in DBT, as a generalist with a free-range method to practice, I have realized that the best way to identify borderline character is to be brave, be kind, and be respectful. Chapter 6. Can you treat borderline personality with unconditional love? Question. Can you cure borderline personality disorder with unconditional love? Answer. No, I'm afraid not. I'm extremely sorry to say this, but it can't. Having said that, unconditional love is incredibly essential to their healing, as long as you aren't strengthening undesirable behavior like abuse. I'm serious. Knowing this and truly accepting it in your body are 2 different things, so I'll say it again. Your love, no matter how deep, unconditional, and unselfish, can't cure this disorder any more than it can cure cancer, a heart problem, schizophrenia, and eating disorders. I am sorry. I know you're convinced you will be the exception. Regrettably, everybody thinks they're an exception. It's a mathematical impossibility. The people who recovered, or are recovering, do so because they work very hard and normally have great support systems with reliable treatment and aftercare support. Sometime later in this book, I'll explain the role that genuine love does play. It's a huge one. Let me more explain why genuine love isn't a treatment. The brain's role in BPD. First off, BPD is a brain disorder, like bipolar or schizophrenia. You cannot fix the brain. The first neuroscience to do so will make $1 jillion. Extremely quickly, the parts of the brain that control emotions, make them stable, and prevent the person from taking spontaneous actions out of whack in folks with this disorder. Researchers have better language than out of whack, but it will provide for these purposes. The parts of the brain that control emotions are overactive and flood the brain like a tsunami. If you look at borderline brain under tension with an MRI, you can see this happening in flower of color. The brain is broken partially simply because of problems with the neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers. It involves the physical structures that you would see if you were doing an autopsy, the amygdala, if you want to be specific. Psychiatrists try to repair brain chemicals with different kinds of medications, but we're at the beginning stages, and we can only deal with BPD traits, not BPD as a whole. It is uncertainty that includes attempting different medications in different strengths. Every person with BPD responds differently, and there are a ton of bad effects. There is no surgery to fix the physical brain, except perhaps in a science fiction movie. The environment. Love by itself, without work from the person, can't get rid of the early environment that the person was raised in. If their caregivers were not really good ones, that suggests by the time that the necessary attachment bonds were formed, around 2 years old, your loved one was in the wrong line for parents. Developing good attachment bonds is critical to forming healthy relationships. It's still possible with some work and treatment. None of us had flawless parents or caretakers, but if they were violent, your family member has additional work to do. If they will not do that, it is a problem. The love you give now can't alternate to the love they were supposed to have gotten back then. The lifestyle of Marilyn Monroe is a good example. Born to a mentally unsteady mom and missing dad, she spent her childhood in a series of foster houses and an orphanage. For a while, she lived with her ill mother, who had a series of psychological crises. She had better homes, but 2 times men tried to sexually assault her. Circulated from one place to another, she actually never had a chance. As an adult, she was well known for her emotional vulnerability. No matter how many men loved her for real, no matter how cherished she was to the public, absolutely nothing could fill the empty hole inside her. She could be the most popular star with very likely borderline personality disorder, aside from Princess Diana, although neither were formally identified. The undetectable, transparent plastic spacesuit. The transparent plastic spacesuit is the third reason love can't cure BPD, or more precisely, get rid of certain BPD traits. Think of the spacesuit as a semi-permeable and flexible person-shaped, clear 3-inch piece of plastic that surrounds your loved one at all times, but can't be seen. It also can't be felt. You can try to break it, burn through it, or use a buzzsaw, a brick, a spear, a drill, or dynamite. But the suit is really difficult, developed over a lifetime of things like low self-esteem, rejection, sensitivity, embarrassment, the fear of desertion, the fear of intimacy, the fear of being understood, the fear of engulfment, and an inability to believe they are worthy of love. The big thing to remember about the spacesuit is that it was there before you ever walked into the scene. You did not trigger it. You can't control it. You cannot cure it. The suit belongs to the disease, the way that red dots belong to the measles, or deadly cells are part of cancer. You can't deal with the cells, spots, or spacesuit without dealing with the underlying disorder. And you aren't the therapist. A short exercise. There's only one way it can be opened, from the inside. For this reason, it is pretty much up to the borderline individual. Try this exercise to see how scary it is. Make a list of all your inchoate fears, defenses, and secret things you don't want people to know about you. Think of tearing them all down and being exposed. How would you want somebody to deal with approaching you about them? The issue isn't that you do not give enough love. The problem is that it can't permeate the spacesuit. Your messages of love can have a hard time getting through to them. It's not your fault. Your loved one may implicate you of not saying, "I love you" enough, or saying it with the wrong inflection or at the wrong time. They might claim that you say it, but don't show it, because you didn't give up your family for them, or you work too many hours, put your friends in front of them, have hobbies that take some time without them, do not want to have sex when they do, want to do things without them, want privacy, don't want to represent each minute, or have a life of your own. And by the way, you are worthy of all of those things, and you don't need their approval to have them. Borderline reasoning. These are all excuses. The real issue is that your member of the family does not feel the love, and they don't know why. And that's not their fault. The suit is invisible to them also. So if it is not them, they figure, it makes sense that the issue must be you. It's an error that hurts. You can ask your family member with BPD what you could do to help them feel loved, and do it if it is a sensible request. However, if others in your life aren't grumbling, you are acting loving, so stop feeling guilty. 2 tin cans with a string. You presume, however, that your message is linking. You do so much for them. In fact, you may do way too much for them. But remember, Wi-Fi desert. You get frustrated because they keep checking you to prove it to them, and not always in a good way. If you have a partner with BPD, they test just because the start of the relationship is over, and now that you're not fawning over them each second, they're really afraid of losing you. They could be biting just to see how long you stay. In the meantime, you're not passing the test. You do not even appear to care. You are not quitting your life to write love poems, look in their eyes, and play love tunes the way you did during those heady, extreme first few weeks. Individuals with narcissist personality disorder have trouble reaching a much deeper level of intimacy after the initial high of a new relationship. People with BPD may need so much of a guarantee and presentations of love that this much deeper level provokes anxiety. It is natural that candlelit dinners give way to eliminate about who is doing the dishes. It must be a scary time for individuals with BPD. The self-fulfilling prediction. When a person has low self-regard, everything looks like criticism. You don't say it, but they hear it. You say you are not thinking that. They don't actually believe you. Constantly remember that with BPD, emotions, accomplishment over facts each time. They do not always let themselves feel the love. And it doesn't matter how you try to prove it to them. Some people are pessimists. You may have become aware of an individual in a job examination who heard nothing but rave evaluations and one tiny criticism, and all they remember is that one small review. Well, the person with BPD in the assessment heard, "You're about to get fired," and they remain in crisis mode. You could suggest a completely different restaurant than they want to go to, and they will hear, "I do not value your viewpoint at all about anything." You will quickly discover that you cannot prove an unfavorable thing. You can't prove that at this moment there is not a 6-foot-tall purple bunny with a machete following you just beyond your sight, just because even with a dozen policemen following you, the bunny can hide itself. So you can't prove that you really love someone if they do not think they are worthy of love. What love can do. Genuine love cannot treat your relative, but if a borderline individual is working towards recovery, it is a 10 out of 10 in value. Since they really believe they are worthless and bad, total acceptance helps them learn they're adorable. Whenever I meet a recovered borderline person, I always ask them what was the essential to their healing. Just one thing they all reference is genuine support. Most found it from a unique belief in God. Religions aside, secularly speaking, this makes a lot of sense. All loving, all forgiving, all giving. There at all hours of the day or night, and with just a few needs of his own, God creates an excellent support. In terms of unconditional support, therapists follow. Therapists do not have needs of their own. Their purpose is just to be there for their clients and assist in their recovery. Psychoanalysts who concentrate on reparenting are specifically fit for this. Numerically, next comes members of the family, especially partners. Partners have their own needs, and that's okay. You aren't going to be flawless. You aren't God. You aren't a therapist, and you shouldn't be. Your role is a member of the family, not a psychiatrist. It's okay. It's essential that you express your needs, take some time for yourself, say no, set limits, have your own support system, stay safe, put the children first, be happy, and live a typical life as much as you can. If you give up yourself, you're going to come to resent your partner. You won't have anything left to give. But this only works as long as you aren't tolerating or accepting abuse. That's not recovery. That is enabling and going backwards. This has been Borderline Disorder, Relationships, Drama, and Warnings by John Kirschchen, narrated by Sarah Owens. Borderline Disorder: The Anxiety and Struggles of People with Borderline Personality Disorder by John Kirschchen, narrated by Sarah Owens. Chapter 1: The Borderline Father and Mother, a Survival Guide. The Worth of Identity. Identity is a precious thing. It starts with a sense of self and grows in time to a set of values, a belief in what's right and wrong, and a capacity to defend oneself, regardless of effects. Good parenting cultivates this precious part of a human being. A strong identity gives you the right to request what you are worthy of, give happily without feeling used, and say no just simply because it feels right. Though, what happens if you were brought up by a mother or dad who had been truly injured? Let's take a certain look at the borderline mother, how she may behave, and what you can do to make it through. Enduring a borderline parent. People with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, present a risk to the sense of self of those in sustained relationships with them. That holds specifically for their children, but spouses can suffer too. Survival of one's sense of self while in a relationship with a BPD needs an understanding of relating patterns that are characteristic of BPD and some tools for securing oneself while attempting to be kind, helpful, comprehending, and perhaps loving. Some specific harsh patterns of relating will be talked about here, with some techniques for safeguarding the self at the time of direct exposure. Responses to former blog sites have mentioned that BPD is a medical condition, and that those affected do not choose to be so affected. While this is certainly true, it doesn't alleviate the effects of the disorder on friends and family. Many psychiatric conditions have devastating repercussions to relatives. Examples include pedophilia, alcoholism, antisocial personality disorder, and dementia, such as Alzheimer's dementia. Coping with affected people doesn't really mean blaming them for being messed up, but it does imply protecting a person's self. Allowing an autistic child to injure a caretaker does not help the kid. Allowing a person with BPD to damage one's sense of self doesn't benefit the BPD. Here are 3 ruthless traps to keep from. The harsh truth. The truth to a BPD isn't repaired in reality, but rather a story that can be changed to support their understandings and intentions. Goal requirements are neither recognized nor acknowledged. As a result of this, inconsistencies and contradictions typically take place. BPD. Why do you act guarded around me? Kid. Because you've hurt me in the past, and I don't want to be hurt again. BPD. I hurt you? I do not remember that. When? Child. You used to hit me with a belt when I was a kid. BPD. I do not remember that. You're making it up, you poor jerk. Here, memory is reworded to serve the BPD, and after that, used as a bludgeon. That achieves a complete, though distorted, reversal of the victim role. The BPD is implicated of abuse and winds up being the victim of false accusations, hence validating subsequent abuse. BPD. I found a terrific resort in Palm Springs. Why don't we all go there for Christmas? Child. Mom, we already have strategies to go to Bermuda this year. BPD. Am I going with you? Child. We hadn't actually thought about that. BPD. But you said we're disappearing together. Kid. I said maybe we could go away sometime together. BPD. That's not how I remember it. I comprehend that this is not something you want to do. I won't ask again. The fluidity of the ruthless truth permits it to be controlled for selfish purposes. In this particular case, the BPD wishing to choose a getaway and go with her child and grandchildren. The end result is, again, that the BPD becoming the victim and validating more abuse. The brutal truth cannot be challenged or debated effectively. Even presentation of hard evidence doesn't change the vibrant where the BPD is the victim and the kid is cast as unloving and worthwhile of abuse. Child. When we discussed this before, we looked on the computer at several different dates, times, and locations. BPD. I don't remember that. Child. I have the search history here on my computer screen. BPD. Let me see it. Kid. Shows her. BPD. Clearly you do not want me to be with you or your family for Christmas, and so I will not. It's obvious how you feel about me. There are many strategies for handling the harsh truth. The best are preemptive. Be very cautious about making suggestions. They are typically modified as offers, and after that, dealt with as privileges. Utilize the internet. Email permits you to refer the BPD back to written text for recommendation. Be prepared to end the conversation with, "I comprehend that this is how you see it." The brutal test. The brutal test includes approval based on the expectation of excellence. The expectation of perfection is set up for failure and rejection. BPD. How can I reach you in an emergency situation? Child. Call me? BPD. What if you don't answer? Kid. Leave a message? BPD. What if it's an emergency? Kid. Call 911 first. BPD. I need to be able to reach you anytime. Child. I will do the best I can. BPD. What do you have in your life that is more important than me? Here, the BPD has set up the situation where she gets to judge the top priority of the security thing. By requesting a reason regarding what is going on when you could have been calling her, she puts herself in both the victim position and in the position to judge you as a human being based on a single requirement, reachability. The BPD is also a ruthless judge. When there's more than one way to interpret a circumstance, the BPD will pick the one who optimizes her role as victim. BPD. I called last night and you didn't return my call till today. Why didn't you call me back last night? Kid. I didn't hear the phone ring. BPD. What were you doing? Kid. I was sleeping. BPD. Nobody in your house can hear a phone ring at night. Kid. This hasn't been a problem before. BPD. Oh, so it only happens when I call. If one effort to reassure the BPD that they are available, then there will be a brutal test. The BPD will try unforeseen contact under some pretense to examine accessibility. If the kid is available, it will then be expected that this standard will be maintained forever. Other tests will occur and eventually result in failure, which is answered with abuse. The harsh test is unforgiving. No matter how many times the test has really been passed, a failure can't be forgiven. Making it through the ruthless test includes verifying that it would be undoubtedly good to have somebody who can offer unlimited availability, but clearly acknowledging that this isn't possible. Security of the sense of self requires an understanding that not having the ability to satisfy an irrational request does not make one a piece of garbage. The ruthless clock. BPDs have their own unique clock, which determines the quality of relationships. When they get in touch with someone or expect somebody to contact them, a clock is set. This clock figures out if the response is timely or not. Once the limit for prompt has passed, the other party is determined to be an abandoner. This is the worst thing that anybody can be. This implies that you are inadequate, a failure, garbage. No one knows what the time the clock is set to. Calling after the time limit is of restricted use. BPD. Why didn't you return my call? Kid. I was going to. BPD. When? Child. In a number of hours. BPD. I wish I never had children. The ruthless clock is a version of the brutal test, where the BPD sets up unrealistic expectations of others. When others are not able to meet the unreasonable expectations, they are punished with psychological abuse, which is justified by the BPD's sense of being the victim because he or she did not get what they wanted. Leaving the ruthless clock includes validating that it would be ideal to have a source of security that could respond all of the time, but that you can only offer what you can offer. Addressing the question as to what is more important is an established to fail, a kind of brutal test, simply because practically no justification will be judged ideal, since they are to be the first priority. Because of that, this question should not be answered. An alternative reaction could be, something very important. It doesn't matter what that was. Once again, the defense of the self is connected with the realization that the expectancy is irrational, and therefore the failure to meet an irrational expectation is not premises for condemnation. Galvanize your harsh galoshes. If you have spent years trying to soothe a BPD, and you choose now to leave the merry-go-round, you're going to almost certainly incur rage. The longer you have allowed the abuse, the longer it will take for popular to start to dissipate. It will never totally remit, but if you make it clear that an expression of rage will induce separation, while more socialized responses will yield a more positive result, there will be a gradual acceptance. BPD. I need you to come over right now. There's a mouse in the closet. Child. I'm at work. I can't arrive until I'm off. BPD. I need you now. Kid. You can either wait until I leave work or call a pest control specialist now. BPD. You are an ineffective jerk. Kid. Those are your options. Abusing me will just serve to get rid of one of your alternatives. Calling abuse what it is by name is very important to setting a border. There are two caveats when using this technique. One is, don't bluff. Don't threaten any reaction that you aren't prepared to dish out. The second caveat is that if you are threatened, you should follow through, or you will be identified as a bluffer, and this will quickly cause total disregard of any boundaries that are set verbally. The borderline mom is abusive and positions a really tough set of challenges. The natural response of a kid, even the adult kid of such people, is to keep from, obstacle, or appease. If you stay in a relationship with a borderline mother, then all three of these methods will be assaulted with anger, abandonment, or guilt. In order to survive, you should comprehend that you are handling a brutal set of conditions. Know what's coming, set limits actively, and be loving when you feel safe. All this is simpler said than done. A really good therapist can go a long way. While borderline personality disorder is found in men and also women, sex appears to play a role in how they manifest symptomatically. Borderline guys are more antisocial, violent, and impulsive. They probably do not manage to remain in a parenting relationship with their kids like the borderline mothers, who tend to be emotionally labile, with anxiety and PTSD symptoms. Chapter 2. Anticipatory Anxiety. Not so many years ago, borderline personality disorder was considered untreatable. What is BPD? Its name gives us a clue. At the time BPD was identified, it was considered a disorder in which the individual was on the border between peace of mind and madness. That idea has changed. It is now pretty much concurred that individuals with BPD are sane. They just drive other individuals insane, particularly their children. James Masterson, with whom I studied, was the first to develop a treatment for BPD. Till that time, it was considered untreatable. But Dr. Masterson took a very different method, and it worked. It worked, at the very least, when he used the treatment. The problem is, it is really challenging for a therapist to be undaunted enough in using the treatment while staying entirely neutral mentally. When the therapist sees the borderline doing self-destructive things, staying neutral isn't easy, especially when a borderline is destructive to others, including their kids. Why does a borderline mother damage her kids? Masterson said borderline mothers don't always harm their children. Still, he said, A borderline mom requires, he used that word particularly, at least one borderline kid. So why is that? She cannot tolerate feelings of desertion. She must, no matter what it does to the kid, cripple at the very least one kid so that the child will never ever, even as an adult, have the ability to leave her. This means ruining at least one kid's capability to operate as an independent individual. The child must never outgrow a sense of being so part of the mother that, as Dr. Masterson put it, there's a belief by each of them that if one dies, the other will die. The potential for mental blackmail is now visible, for if a child really believes his very existence depends on his mother's existence, or vice versa, and is therefore responsible for her life, how can he venture far from her? What if she should have a cardiovascular disease and he isn't there to save her? That is specifically the problem a borderline fear of flying client presented to me. She was in a Grammy Award-winning singing group that was scheduled to explore Europe. When her mother discovered this, she said to her daughter, "But what will I do if I have a heart attack and you're way over there?" That paralyzed my patient. She and her borderline mother were so entangled that to fly to Europe emerged in her mind as the same as suicide. How does this enmeshment happen? Let's say the child is 12 months old. At this time, if the toy the child is playing with is taken and put under a blanket, the kid will not raise the blanket and retrieve the toy. Why is that? Because when the toy heads out of sight, it stops existing as far as the kid is concerned. It isn't just out of sight, out of mind. It is out of sight, out of existence. Apply this to the child's relationship with the mother. If the mother is not in the room, she to the kid no longer exists. But in the next 6 months, that will change, for the kid is in the process of building an internal reproduction of the mom. And when it's building, it's complete at around 18 months, the mother will exist to the child, even if she is elsewhere. Fast forward to 18 months of age. The mom is having fun with the child, but gets up and leaves the room. For a while, the 18-month-old kid is content. The child uses the internally constructed reproduction of the mom and of its relationship with the mother to keep the mother real to the child. However, as the minutes pass, the internal reproduction's influence damages. The kid begins to lose an appropriate sense of the mom and needs to find her and get an embrace to physically restore his sense of her. Then he can go back to playing alone again. When the child's sense of the mom is strong, he acts like he is very independent. That has been described as the kid saying to the mother, "Mother, I really appreciate your taking care of me through these formative months. Yet now that I'm completely grown and independent, I have no more need of you and I'll be on my way." And after that, just minutes later, the child frantically needs a hug. The borderline mom needs the kid to stay clingy. She can't take this, "Now I need you, now I do not." Up until now, and up until the child displayed independence, the mother-child relationship was perfect for the borderline mom. But when the kid shows any notification, that word, any signs of independence, "I will be on my way," the borderline mom must nip that independence in the bud. When the kid comes to her seeking after her, rejecting her by demonstrating signs of independence, the mom declines the kid. She deals with the kid as, "First you claim you do not need me. Now you say that you do. You are inconsistent." Masterson called this an eye for an eye reaction to the Talonic reaction. He said it is the most deep-rooted response by any borderline, and when a borderline is in treatment, it is the last of the pathology to go away. It is a retaliation in kind. If you decline me, I will decline you. Even though what the kid is doing is natural and healthy growth, the borderline mom sees natural and healthy development as rejection and responds in kind. Thus, the child who is, at this point, dependent on the mother without any choice, but to give up the natural and healthy growth. Plus, because part of the natural and healthy development includes what's called separation and individualization, separating one's identity from the mother and being an individual, development stops. It is for this reason that borderline personality disorder is considered apprehended development, detained at the age of 18 months, the time when the kid's separation and individualization must be supported, not stymied. From the child's viewpoint, up until he expressed himself, things were fine. Mother was an angel. Now, on his expression of himself, the angelic mother vanishes and is changed by the wicked witch of the West. In order for a child to develop, he needs a single version of his mother to incorporate. Yet now there are two variations: the angelic mom and the wicked witch of the West mom. Just when he was about to develop a reputable and considerable internal reproduction of the angelic mom, it turns out that he cannot depend on that version of her. That leaves him not able to construct a functional internal replica of her. And since the mom won't respond to the child's authentic, independent self, the kid's real self doesn't get mirrored by the mom. That indicates that the child also becomes borderline, not able, through being unskilled, to construct any functional internal resources. Simply put, the kid does not have an internal version of a constant mom, nor does the child have an appropriate internal idea of its own real self. And since the mother rejects the kid's genuine self-expression, when the child experiences emotion, the mom doesn't react. Several weeks ago, I wrote an essay about the movement world in which I said a parent or caretaker would never go to Disney World and position a kid on the rides there alone. Instead, the parent would go with the child so as to comfort the child if the ride should end up being way too much for the child to deal with. But the borderline mother, when it comes to the emotional world, lets the child experience feelings completely alone. Hence, the child comes to regard feelings as triggering feelings of seclusion, abandonment, and maybe terror. Fast forward to adulthood, when the borderline once kid, now adult, tries to be an individual and attempts to be a different person getting on a plane. The mother he was so dependent on is not there. Unable to function either as an individual or as an individual who can regulate emotion, flying is tough or unrealistic. However, anticipatory anxiety remains a difficulty. For the extremely thought about doing something individually triggers a replay of rejection by the mom, starting at 18 months, but no doubt lasting through childhood and extending into the present. And that powerfully remembered rejection and abandonment of his real self triggers the individual to experience, or go to the edge of experiencing, almost intolerable distress. As this almost excruciating distress comes down upon the person who is trying to operate as an individual, he's likely to abandon his effort to operate as an individual, and if the emotions do not immediately diminish, he may turn to the usage of drugs, alcohol, sexually acting out, or perhaps cutting himself to override awareness of the relatively intolerable potential, the vivid recall of long-lasting desertion. The session with the member of the singing group who really believed flying to Europe was the equivalent of suicide took place years ago. However, I had a similar session last week with a client whose mother is borderline. The client was planning to fly the next day, but was feeling that she needed to cancel the flight. She said she was sure that if she got on the plane, it would crash. She agreed nevertheless that if she didn't get on the plane, it would come securely. I explained to her that, except in a Stephen King novel, the thoughts and fears of an individual in the passenger cabin cannot penetrate the captain nor the mechanical gadgets on the aircraft and cause a crash. My saying this triggered her to recoil, just as if something had been said to her that she couldn't manage. She firmly insisted that she was acting in her best interest by canceling her flight. I told her I couldn't take that seriously, and I didn't actually believe that she could either. Then she said she felt baffled. I still remember Doc Masterson's words. Don't ever buy into a borderline's claim that they're puzzled. They aren't. They are in defense. I told her that Masterson's triad was being played out even as we talked. Although she would initially say that she wanted to take the flight, she then said it was in her benefit not to. I explained that Step 1 and Step 3 were visible. Wanting to take the flight is the initial step of the triad. Wanting to cancel the flight is the third step of the triad. I mentioned the missing step to her, the second step, the practically unbearable emotions that she developed when thinking about operating independent of her mom. These emotions, as soon as she began to have them, pushed her to cover them over by rapidly deciding it was in her best interest not to fly. Sometimes, then, anticipatory anxiety is a vibrant that includes what Dr. Masterson called the personality disorder triad. The person first tries to serve as an independent person by planning to take a flight. Second, this independent conduct triggers the same emotions that happened when attempting to be a different and independent person as a kid. These emotions of abandonment are so extreme that if they're permitted to reach awareness, they will be almost intolerable. So the individual rapidly, perhaps immediately, covers over these dreadful emotions by giving up the plan to act individually. Further, the defense against these emotions is covered by justification that ending independent action makes a lot more sense. By explaining the triad, the defense against the feelings is exposed. The individual becomes conscious of the dysphoric emotions that they are attempting to get rid of. With the help of the therapist, these emotions are supported. When the person permits these feelings to be felt, rather than running from them, they no longer have to give up independent activity. Chapter 3. The Social Struggles of Those with Borderline Personality. That the ones with borderline personality disorder are particularly susceptible to rejection appears to be part and parcel of their mental makeup. An unconfident attachment style, in which people constantly fear being deserted or ignored, is regarded as one of the most crucial aspects at play in causing the instability and identity problems they face as adults. If you know someone who has borderline personality disorder, or at the very least, some features of the disorder, you are acutely knowledgeable about how hard it is for this person to feel that the people near to them can be trusted. When you're out together, this person can end up being furious if your attention fluctuates, or perhaps worse, if you turn away totally and talk with other individuals. You need to look directly into this individual's eyes when you're having a conversation, and you always have to be readily available should this person need to reach you. Failing to return a text can look like the end of the world, quite literally, participating in a crisis, if not a near meltdown. New research by Heidelberg University's Lisa Lipke and Associates, 2018, tested the notion that, rather than being only vulnerable to social rejection, individuals with borderline personality disorder are sensitive even to acceptance. Testing this counterintuitive notion, the German scientists proposed that individuals with this disorder process social information differently than people who don't have this disorder. And that's what leads to their failure to accept being accepted. The cognitive process that they use to translate social information predispositions them towards chronically feeling rejected, even when objectively the reverse is really happening to them. Their decreased experience of social connectedness, in the words of the authors, means that they never feel included in situations when others are in fact reaching out to them as part of the group. You might, according to this interpretation, make additional room at the table when these individuals come to join you at a dining establishment, but instead of regarding your invite as originating from authentic liking towards them, they analyze the offer as a kind of rejection. They might, if this is the truth, wonder why you didn't just wait for them to show up in the first place. To test the existence of this negative examination bias, the research team developed what they call the Mannheim Virtual Group Interaction Paradigm, or MVGIP, to develop a practical circumstance involving a computer simulation in which individuals would feel either socially accepted or turned down by what they really believed to be 6 other participants. The experiment involved a meet and greet, stage 1, in which the participants were introduced to avatars of these experimentally created other individuals, followed by a score job in which they examined the other people, phase 2, causing the next occurrence, in which they received feedback about how the others liked them, phase 3. In phase 3, the control included acceptance, being told they were liked, or rejection, being given negative scores. In the next part of the experiment, the individuals played a trust game, in which they were led to actually believe that they were playing with new people, whom they could either take on or work together with in a simulated cash financial investment task where joint methods determined individual benefits. The first co-player, the trustee, again a simulated player, would first show cooperation, then break that bond of trust by not working together, and after that, finally would return to being cooperative, appearing to restore the initial trust. The second co-player, a provocateur, was introduced to induce antisocial conduct, anger and rage on the part of the real participant. The idea was that when the individual with borderline personality disorder felt betrayed by the trustee, this betrayal would turn into rage toward the provocateur, measured by taking cash away in the financial investment task, when in actuality, that second co-player had not done anything to should have such wrath. This complex speculative procedure could guarantee that the conduct of people with borderline personality disorder could be observed in real time and compared through the manipulation of the conditions of the simulated game with people who didn't have borderline personality disorder. The procedures used to test the social acceptance bias hypothesis included expectations of approval or rejection, positive or negative ratings from the co-players, emotional reactions to approval or rejection, behavior toward the trustee in the cooperation-betrayal game, and punitive behavior to the provocateur, measured in the form of taking cash away. The individuals included 56 female patients with borderline personality disorder, matched by age and education, with typical controls. As the authors expected, the borderline personality group had a greater anticipation of rejection than did the healthy controls. The patients also got angrier after rejection than the healthy controls, but they also got mad even after the task led to them feel accepted. The trust game produced results that farther supported the idea of a negative social addiction predisposition in people with borderline personality disorder. When given the chance to invest in a cooperative fashion with their co-player, before the rejection took place, the borderline people exposed to the acceptance condition were less likely to exhibit this pro-social type of method, or in the words of the authors, suggesting a disadvantage effect of positive social encounters on subsequent interactions in BPD, borderline personality disorder, even when those subsequent interactions were with overall complete strangers. What was so interesting about these results is that at the time of the cooperative phase of the trust game, the individuals were led to actually believe that they were sharing profits in a 50-50 fashion with their co-player. That those with borderline personality disorder perceived this conduct adversely might, according to the authors, be because of the fact that they did not regard this equal split as fair. Those borderline personality disorder clients may really need their partners to offer up a larger share to feel that they are truly being treated as an equitable fashion. Even more odd, the break of cooperation and subsequent efforts by the co-player to comprise did not produce any differences between the borderline and healthy individuals. As the authors keep in mind, this suggests that clients with BPD are well able to forgive their social partner for disturbances in cooperation and restore cooperative conduct over a course of several interactions when the initial step is made by the patient's interaction partner. With this desire to restore positive relations, the added finding that people with BPD and healthy controls responded similarly to the provocateur then seems to make sense. With this experimental technique, the German authors had the ability to show that at a totally standardized social circumstance, where the only functions that changed were under speculative control, people with BPD have low expectations for their social partners that they can't change upward when other people appear to show interest or concern in them. What's more, being treated well by their interaction partners leads the BPD individuals to become suspicious of people not included with that interaction, who in fact are acting fairly to them. To sum up, the inequality of expectations and experiences that seem to characterize individuals with borderline personality disorder appears to be one that can only farther aggravate their suspicions that the people they have relationships with don't truly care. In your relationship with these individuals, it would appear that the only way to guarantee consistency is to keep in mind that acceptance alone isn't enough to smooth the rough waters that can face you and your partner. Apart from whatever restorative interventions could be included, concentrating on the expectations, not just the experiences, would seem to be the key to ensuring steady and fulfilling interactions. Chapter 4. Should you tell the borderline he's borderline? Most treatment approaches, including dialectical behavior treatment, mentalization-based treatment, and Gunderson's good psychiatric management, initiate the therapy program by informing the patient about BPD. Professionals in the field, Linehan, Kernberg, Gunderson, and others in the field endorse this method. However, is it always best to label the patient with this diagnosis? In most cases, an individual looking for help is relieved to learn that his behavior has a name, is comprehended, and can be treated. Many patients are already acquainted with the diagnosis and feel verified by the therapist's verification. Dealing with the professional on the detected disorder with targeted objectives can facilitate development. However, there could be instances when focus on the BPD label may lead to way too much information that impedes treatment. Most people who satisfy the undoubtedly rather artificial requirements that define our comprehension of BPD also struggle with comorbid illnesses such as depression, bipolar disorder, drug abuse, eating disorders, etc. In some of these cases, concern with the BPD label and its regular negative associations might sidetrack focus from what might be more lethal signs. Some BPD clients with a victimization self-image may wallow in the diagnosis, conjuring up the label as a real reason for behaviors, but staying away from challenging them. Some BPD clients over-identify with the label, exceedingly researching it and acting out symptoms. It is always best to individualize treatment approaches to attain the optimum fit between patient and therapist. Bestowing a diagnostic label on suffering is much less important than figuring out how to best alleviate it. Chapter 5. Attachment. Attachment is the emotional bond that forms between the infant and the caregiver, and it is the means through which the helpless baby gets main needs met. Then it ends up being an engine of subsequent social, emotional, and cognitive development. The early social experience of the infant stimulates growth of the brain and can have an enduring impact on the ability to form steady relationships with others. Attachment offers the baby's first coping system. It sets up a mental depiction of the caregiver in an infant's mind, one that can be summed up as a comforting mental presence in difficult moments. Attachment also enables an infant to separate from the caregiver without distress and to begin to check out the world around her. Neuroscientists actually believe that attachment is such a primal need that there are networks of neurons in the brain committed to setting it moving in the first place, and a hormonal agent, oxytocin, that fosters the process. Attachment in early life. Attachment develops through everyday interactions as a caregiver takes care of an infant's needs. The bond between the infant and the caregiver is normally so well developed before the end of the first year of life that it is possible to test the nature and quality of the bond at that time. As a result of their work with many child-caregiver pairs, scientists have described several fundamental patterns of attachment. In their research studies, scientists quickly separate children from their own caregiver and observe their behavior before and after they're reunited with the caretaker. Children with a secure attachment may be distressed upon separation, but warmly welcome the caregiver back through eye contact and hug-seeking. Anxious, resistant attachment defines a child who is frightened by separation and continues to display restless conduct once the caregiver returns. Avoidant attachment represents a kid who responds fairly calmly to a caretaker's separation and doesn't embrace their return. Disorganized attachment appears in awkward or ambivalent conduct toward a caregiver upon return, approaching, then turning away from, or perhaps hitting the caretaker, and may be the result of youth trauma. A bulk of kids tend to show safe attachment behavior in research studies, while others seem insecure, demonstrating one of the other patterns. How does secure attachment develop? Secure attachment in children has been thought to result from sensitive, responsive caregiving and insecurity from its lack. While there's evidence that parenting can influence attachment security, it is also clear that other elements, consisting of genetics, play a formative role. What is attachment theory? British psychotherapist John Bowlby proposed that kids' attachment behaviors, such as showing distress at a parent or caretaker's lack, are part of an evolved behavior system that helps ensure they are taken care of. Psychologist Mary Ainsworth later started to experimentally study variations in how children respond to separation from parents. Others have broadened attachment theory to adult relationships. How does trauma impact attachment? Abuse and trauma in childhood might prevent the development of secure attachment and may be predictive of attachment insecurity later in life. In cases of serious disregard or mistreatment, a child may develop reactive attachment disorder, or RAD, identified by trouble forming a bond with caretakers. Attachment styles in the adult years. Attachment security and behaviors have been studied in adult relationships, and attachment-related patterns that vary between individuals are commonly called attachment styles. There seems to be an association between a person's attachment attributes early in life and in adulthood, but the correlations are far from perfect. Many adults feel safe and secure in their relationships and comfortable depending on others, echoing secure attachment in children. Others tend to feel anxious about their connection with close others, or choose to avoid getting close to them in the first place. Research studies of individuals with borderline personality disorder, characterized by a yearning for intimacy and a hypersensitivity to rejection, have shown a high occurrence and seriousness of insecure attachment. Attachment styles in adulthood have labels similar to those used to specify attachment patterns in children. Secure, anxious, preoccupied, high anxiety, low avoidance. Dismissing, avoidant, low anxiety, high avoidance. Fearful, avoidant, high anxiety, high avoidance. Still, attachment styles might be better thought of as dimensional, where a person rates as reasonably high, low, or somewhere in the middle in their levels of attachment-related anxiety and attachment-related avoidance. In addition, an individual might not exhibit the same exact sort of attachment pattern in every close relationship. How can you tell if a person has an insecure attachment style? An individual might have high attachment anxiety if she worries a lot about being abandoned or uncared for. That is measurable by an individual's agreement with declarations such as, "I worry about being alone," and I often stress that romantic partners don't actually love me. Someone high in attachment avoidance very likely frets about other people getting too close. How does attachment influence relationships? People with a safe attachment style tend to fare better on outcomes such as relationship stability and sexual fulfillment, research suggests, and could be less likely to engage in disruptive acts such as partner security or harmful sexual conduct. Can you change your attachment style? Attachment styles can change significantly with time, research suggests, and might differ from relationship to relationship. Enduring a horrible relationship may lead to a less secure attachment orientation. A history of helpful relationships might result in increased security. Treatment in providing a safe connection and an opportunity to learn relational abilities could also be practical. This has been Borderline Disorder: The Anxiety and Struggles of People with Borderline Personality Disorder by John Kirstian, narrated by Sarah Owens.